Two of the four components of public assistance are facility and work. We combine these two since the requirements are the same. As a reminder, a facility must be a building, public works system, equipment, or natural feature. Work is categorized as either emergency or permanent. Emergency work is work that must be done immediately to save a life, protect the public health and safety, protect an improved property, or eliminate or lessen an imminent threat of additional damage. Emergency work holds two categories: Category A, debris removal, and Category B, emergency protective measures. Permanent work is work required to restore a facility to its pre-disaster design and function. Permanent work holds five categories: C through G: road systems, water control, buildings and equipment, public utilities, and recreational or other. First, the damage to the components must be from the declared disaster and located in the disaster area. Sometimes there are questions pertaining to leased property. Review any agreements or contracts to provide documented proof of the legally responsible party if the work is not on property owned and occupied by the applicant. Repairs to vacant structures are not eligible. This does not mean that people had to be in the structure at the time of the event. Instead, this means that the structure wasn't standing unoccupied and vacant for months. FEMA cannot cover costs that are fundable or under the authority of another federal agency. This is regardless of whether the federal source has funding. For example, if there is debris in a Blue Line waterway that falls under the Natural Resources Conservation Service, FEMA cannot touch it because it is covered by another federal source. FEMA's public assistance program is intended to help applicants recover from a disastrous event by restoring to a pre-disaster condition. This is the standard type of project that is done most of the time. However, there are other types of project options that may be desirable, some that may be fundable, and some that may not. If you change the footprint of the structure, this is considered an improved project. FEMA will not pay for any improvements, but they will provide the funding to bring the structure back to its pre-disaster condition. It requires prior approval by FEMA to remain eligible for reimbursement of the costs to bring it back to the pre-disaster condition. An alternate project uses funds for another eligible purpose. This also requires FEMA prior approval. And finally, there are mitigation opportunities. If you would like to add preventative measures that would significantly reduce or permanently eliminate future damage, mitigation is the step you need to take. There are two types of mitigation that can be accessed. The Public Assistance Program can provide limited mitigation assistance to damaged structures using what is called 406 mitigation. If the mitigation measure you would prefer is separate from the damaged facility or structure, you will want the 404 Hazard Mitigation Grant Program. FEMA divides all projects into two tiers: large projects and small projects, and there are differences in how they are handled. The dividing factor is based on the fiscal year. For this, we will use the example of $1 million. For large projects, payments must be requested with supporting documentation. Information specific to the project must be provided on quarterly reports, like total funding approved and expended and the percentage of work completed. And finally, reconciled to actual costs at closeout. For a small project, payments are provided when complete unless specifically requested, and there is no reconciliation to actual cost at closeout. Whatever was awarded is what is provided, regardless of whether that applicant expended more or less than what was awarded. Small project certifications is a mechanism FEMA uses to try to reduce the amount of documentation an applicant must provide. Basically, if you have a small project in one of the categories from B through G, and the project is already complete, you could provide a small project certification with minimal documentation instead of all the documentation necessary on other projects. However, you must have all that documentation necessary to receive a requested payment from the state, and in the event you are audited. Of course, if you have a small project that is not complete, you will need to provide all documentation. FEMA has a minimum project cost that must be met before any eligible projects can be funded. This $4,000 is compared to the net project eligible cost. All discounts, duplication of benefits, or any other deduction is subtracted from the overall cost to get to this net figure. If the result of that meets the minimum, then it is considered fundable. In the example here, after the insurance payment was deducted, the potential project would have been deemed ineligible because the net project cost ended up being below the $4,000 threshold. Per regulation, FEMA provides a 75% federal share to eligible projects, leaving a 25% non-federal share. Every time a disaster is declared in Tennessee, a decision is made by the governor on whether the state can assist with the non-federal share. To close out this section, we want to discuss the Sections 402 and 406 of the Disaster Recovery Reform Act. Both center on code administration and enforcement. Section 402 makes the provision for public assistance to support building code and floodplain administration and enforcement, including inspection for substantial damage compliance. Section 406 makes the allowance of base and overtime reimbursement associates with Section 402 costs for a period of up to 180 days following the date of declaration. The principles behind these charges are to enhance compliance with state and local building codes and floodplain management ordinances by providing additional resources to carry out required activities after a disaster, and increase the overall speed of recovery by providing financial assistance to conduct building inspections, review disaster-related development in the floodplain, and issue permits to administer and enforce adopted building codes and floodplain ordinances.